When my heart stopped beating and my body collapsed onto the cold linoleum floor of a local pharmacy, I expected my life to flash before my eyes. Instead, I heard my wife's voice over the speaker phone, sharp, icy, and devoid of a single drop of human warmth. The young pharmacist was pleading with her, telling her I was having a massive stroke and might not survive the hour. I waited for her to scream, to cry, or to tell him she was rushing to my side. Instead, she let out an impatient sigh and grumbled that they could not deal with my medical emergency because their limousine was pulling up to take them to a $15,000 non-refundable cruise. She instructed the terrified clerk to call an ambulance, reminding him that I had great insurance, before casually adding that they would check on my condition when they returned from Nassau in 10 days. Then the line went dead. As the darkness pulled me under, two crystal-clear thoughts crystallized in my fading mind. First, the family I had spent 50 years slaving to provide for was leaving me to die alone on a dirty store floor. Second, if by some absolute miracle I survived this stroke, I was going to ensure that Caribbean vacation became the absolute most expensive mistake of their miserable lives. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and at 74 years old, I have built a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate empire in Chicago through pure, unadulterated grit. I work 16-hour days on freezing scaffolding so my family would never know what it felt like to stretch a dollar. Over 5 decades, I accumulated $8 million in prime real estate, stocks, and liquid assets, but I never lost my respect for hard work. 10 minutes before my entire world shattered, I was standing at a pharmacy register arguing over a $200 copay for my blood pressure medication. I was tapping my credit card against the counter, demanding to know why my premium coverage was suddenly declining a routine generic prescription. The young clerk gave me that classic indifferent shrug that young people reserve for elderly men they assume have outlived their usefulness. He dismissively told me that the system was correct and pointed out the growing line behind me, which consisted of a woman clutching diet soda and a teenager glued to his smartphone. They glared at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle blocking their afternoon. A sudden wave of intense heat rushed up the back of my neck, similar to the anger I used to feel when a shady subcontractor tried to skimp on foundation concrete. But within seconds, that heat exploded inside my skull like a heavy sledgehammer. The first sense I lost was the ability to grip my credit card, which slipped uselessly through my numb fingers and clattered onto the counter. I tried to speak, to tell the clerk that something was terribly wrong, but my tongue felt like a thick piece of raw leather stuck in my throat. A garbled, wet noise was all I could produce before the fluorescent light fixtures spun around and the floor rushed up to meet me. I did not feel the physical impact, but suddenly I was staring directly at the dusty white sneakers of the pharmacist while a deafening buzzing noise filled my ears. The primal instinct of a self-made man told me to push myself back up, but my left side was completely dead, turned into useless heavy lead attached to my torso. I rolled my eyes toward the young teenager in line, foolishly hoping he was dialing emergency services to save my life. Instead, he had his smartphone aimed directly at my face, recording a video of an old man twitching helplessly on the floor for social media clout. Meanwhile, the woman stepped backward to protect her belongings, looking annoyed that my medical crisis was delaying her purchase. The clerk finally hurried around the counter, visibly terrified not for my survival, but for the mountain of corporate paperwork my death would cause on his shift. He spotted my phone lying on the floor, cracked from the fall, and quickly dialed the emergency contact displayed on the lock screen. When my wife answered, breathless and shouting about how late I was for our airport ride, the clerk tried to explain that I was paralyzed and lying on the floor. But my loving family treated my life-threatening medical emergency like an unwanted inconvenience that threatened to ruin their tropical getaway. My 30-year-old son, a spoiled failure whose failed business ventures and lavish lifestyle I had personally bankrolled for a decade, could be heard in the background whining about missing priority boarding. My snobbish daughter-in-law chimed in, claiming I was likely exaggerating a minor spell just to maintain out control over their lives and ruin their expensive trip. With cold calculation, my wife told the clerk to let the paramedics take me to the nearest emergency room using my platinum insurance card, firm in her decision that missing their cruise ship was out of the question. When the call disconnected, the repetitive beeping of the dead line echoed off the linoleum tiles like a final insult. I lay there counting the water stains on the ceiling panels, watching one shaped like a massive ship, as tears of pure, unadulterated rage began to burn the corners of my eyes. My own blood had abandoned me to sip cocktails on the ocean, choosing a luxury buffet over my dying breath. When the paramedics finally burst through the automatic doors and loaded my limp body onto a stretcher, I made a silent, binding promise to whatever divine force was listening that if I opened my eyes again, a terrifying storm was coming for them all. Waking up 2 days later in a sterile hospital room did not feel like a miraculous rebirth. It felt like being dragged kicking and screaming across shattered glass. The room was suffocatingly quiet, completely devoid of flowers, cards, or concerned family members sitting in the guest chairs. A tired nurse in oversized scrubs named Clara entered the room, gasping in genuine shock when she realized my eyes were wide open and tracking her movements. When I managed to croak out a single raspy inquiry about my family, Clara looked down at her clipboard in deep discomfort, hesitating to deliver the painful truth. She gently explained that the hospital board had been forced to authorize emergency brain surgery to save my life because not a single family member would answer their phones to give medical consent. They had completely ghosted me while surgeons cut open my skull to drain a massive bleed. Choosing to disconnect from reality the moment their flight touched down in Miami, Clara handed me my personal phone from a plastic bag, and with trembling right fingers, I opened a social media application to confirm the full extent of their brutal betrayal. The very first video on my feed was a live broadcast from my wife, sipping vintage champagne inside a private first-class airplane cabin on her way to the island retreat. She giggled fake sympathy into the camera, explaining to her followers that sometimes you just have to prioritize self-care over family drama. The camera panned over to my son sleeping soundly in a luxury leather seat, before returning to my wife, who was sitting next to her handsome young personal fitness instructor. My chest tightened with searing agony as I watched her take a vintage silk scarf and expensive anniversary gift I had lovingly purchased for her in Paris years ago and use it to wipe sweat from the young trainer's neck. Right at that moment, a fraud alert text notification popped up on my phone screen, asking me to confirm a $4,000-$5,100 transaction at the cruise ship's luxury guest services desk. My family was actively using my hard-earned credit lines to purchase top-shelf liquor and suite upgrades while assuming I was either brain dead or buried in a cold morgue. Nurse Clara offered to fetch a hospital chaplain to help me process the grief, but the heartbreaking sorrow inside me had already hardened into unbreakable steel. I looked her dead in the eye, typed a firm confirmation response to the bank alert to keep their credit cards active, and demanded access to my primary legal representation immediately. I wanted them to keep spending, to get thoroughly intoxicated on my wealth, and to remain blissfully ignorant of the massive financial avalanche heading straight for their pampered lives. Despite the physical agony radiating through my healing body, I swung my legs over the edge of the hospital bed and forced myself into an upright position. Clara protested frantically, warning me that my muscles were completely atrophied and that I required weeks of strict bed rest to recover. I looked her in the eye and told her I had no time to waste lying in a hospital bed because I had a legacy to dismantle, assets to liquidate, and an unforgettable homecoming gift to prepare for my loving family.